In Section 2 of Unit 4, we'll be talking about the Constitutional Convention, the meeting in which the Constitution was debated and recorded and created. So our essential question is, could the Constitution have been written without compromise? America during the 1780s was called the critical period. Critical means urgent or important. Some of the problems that we faced as a nation, our economic system was in shambles, and the Articles of Confederation really had no plan in which to deal with that. We were also seeing social upheavings, rebellions against democratically elected governments, which showed that the articles were not working. You have a lot of people that are struggling to make ends meet after the Revolutionary War, and they need help that the articles are not able to provide. What was on the line? Literally the future of the United States of America. It's hard to imagine here in 2019, or maybe the future, if we're watching this in a couple of years, that America could have failed. But in 1780, it was not predetermined that the United States would have succeeded. So literally the future of the nation was on the line. The Articles of Confederation were not providing for an effective government. So delegates decide that they need to meet up to revise the Articles. So they plan to meet in Philadelphia in May of 1787 with the goal of fixing the Articles of Confederation. This becomes the Constitutional Convention, as we refer to it now, and this is where the new government of the United States is created. Thomas Jefferson referred to this meeting as an assembly of demigods. A demigod is half God, half human. He was referring to the fact that the men in the room were the greatest minds of the time, the most educated men in the nation, and they were also the wealthy elite. We can see here the resume of that group. Many of them were Revolutionary War veterans or had been state governors. They had been present for the writing and signing of the Declaration. Jefferson himself was not present at the meeting. He was over in France being a diplomat, so he was not referring to himself as a demigod, though he certainly would have fit in with the men who were in the room. So this is a painting depicting the Constitutional Convention, showing some of the men who were present. We have George Washington, who was elected the president of the convention, Benjamin Franklin, who was the oldest member in attendance, and there's Alexander Hamilton, a fresh young face, a Revolutionary War veteran, who was very involved in the compromises and the writing of the Constitution. Take a moment and look at the people in attendance. What do they have in common? What can you tell about them from their clothing and from what I've said? And then think about the type of government that they will create. Will they create a government that works just for people who look like them? And the answer is, for the most part, they did. America is celebrated as a great place of democracy and equality and freedom and justice. And in a lot of ways, we did lead the world in those avenues. But from the very beginning of our government, groups of people were intentionally left out. Women, people of color. And the rest of American history is going to be a journey through making the words of the Constitution and of the Declaration that all men are created equal apply to everyone, and not just the people who look like the framers of the Constitution. So though these were the greatest minds, they did not come up with the government that we have from scratch. They were very well educated and had read deeply the thinkings of other smart people, including a man named Montesquieu. He was a French political philosopher during the Enlightenment period in Europe, and he is remembered for articulating the theory of separation of powers, that you have separate branches that each have different powers. The idea behind this is that you will not consolidate all of your power within one body or within one person that may then become corrupt or tyrannical. Baron was his title. Charles was his name, not to be confused, same person. He said in this quote that every man invested with power is apt to abuse it and to carry his authority as far as it will go. If you give a man an opportunity to abuse and corrupt his power, he will. So therefore, you must put things in place to prevent that from happening. When the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty. Under the Articles of Confederation, there could be no liberty because there was only one house that held all of the powers of the federal government. So, at the Constitutional Convention, many people are going to put forth plans of what they think the federal government should look like. We're not going to talk about all of the plans. We're going to talk about the ones that were instrumental in creating the current government that we have. The Virginia plan was put forth by James Madison. Here's a picture of James Madison whenever he was younger. He was pretty young whenever he was helping to write the Constitution. He's known as the father of the Constitution because he was the man who authored majority of it. So the Virginia plan, Madison was from Virginia, was favored by large states because the plan put in place a system that large states would have the most power. It also presented a strong central government. Central also means federal or national. The Virginia plan proposed a bicameral, that means two-house legislature. Representatives in both of those houses would be determined by population. So the more population you have, the more votes that you have, the more power that you have. So, are small states going to agree to the Virginia plan? No. So another plan is put forth, the New Jersey plan. This was favored by small states. This is going to keep the basic structure of the Articles of Confederation. We remember that every state had one vote, no matter the population. It was just a one-house Congress. That is what the New Jersey plan presents, but gives the central government slightly more powers. So the New Jersey plan does once again propose a unicameral, one-house legislature based on equal representation for the states, no matter the population. Are large states going to agree to the New Jersey plan? No. So we get the Great Compromise. This was a solution put forth by delegates from Connecticut. It's often called the Connecticut Compromise as well, that combined the elements of Virginia plan and New Jersey plan to satisfy both large and small population states. So the Great Compromise creates a bicameral legislature, two houses. This is the current Congress that we have. So our two houses are the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate is based on equal representation. This is considered the upper house of Congress. 2 senators per state, no matter the population. So you have Wyoming that currently has 500,000 people living there. They have 2 senators. You have California, which has approximately 39 million people living there, 2 senators. All right? So that was to satisfy the small states. The House of Representatives, the lower body of Congress, is based on population. So California has 53 representatives in the House, while Wyoming has 1. So the Great Compromise is what established our current legislative branch, Congress. The Three-Fifths Compromise was another compromise that was dealing with the representation within the House, which is based on population. Southern states wanted their enslaved populations to be counted towards the population for representation purposes. So even though the enslaved people within the southern states are treated as property, they have no rights, they certainly do not have a voice in government, the southern states wanted them to be counted towards their representation. The North says, no, that's not fair. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Obviously, northern states at this point have a much smaller enslaved population. Many northern states have laws that will eventually make slavery illegal. So the northern states say, no, that's not fair. The compromise is that each enslaved person would be counted as 3/5 of a person. So that is within our Constitution, still today. We are still using the same Constitution from 1787 that slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person. There was also another compromise that centered around slavery. This was the Slave Trade Compromise. There were several delegates at the Constitutional Convention that thought that within the Constitution we should have a hard deadline of when slavery would end in the United States. Also, when the slave trade would end, the import of human beings from Africa to be used as labor within the United States. As soon as you start talking about ending slavery or ending the slave trade, Southern delegates threatened to walk out, specifically the delegates from South Carolina and Georgia, who have a large slave population because their economy is based on plantations, agriculture, and slave labor. So, the Slave Trade Compromise says that the United States would not outlaw the slave trade until 1808, approximately 20 years into the future, but they could levy a tax of $10 on every imported slave. So, the South may continue to import humans from Africa to use for labor, but they will pay a hefty price. $10 was quite expensive in 1787. The last compromise is the Electoral College. If you are not familiar, the Electoral College is the body of electors that elect our president. Whenever you go to the polls to vote for president, you do not vote directly for the candidate. You cast a vote for an elector who will cast your vote on your behalf. So the idea is, let's take 2016, if you cast a vote for Clinton, then you are casting a vote for the elector of Clinton. Donald Trump won most of the votes in North Carolina, so North Carolina's 15 electors all cast their vote for Trump. That is the way the Electoral College works. If this sounds a bit silly, honestly it is. It is a crazy way to conduct elections, but it was a compromise created by our founding fathers. The main reason is that they did not trust common people to vote in their best interests. They believed that there were too many uneducated citizens that could potentially drag the country to ruin if they were given their way. So they wanted to give the elite the final say. That's where the electors come in. Technically, the electors could change their vote if they wanted to, if they believed that the candidate that they had been told to vote for was not qualified. There were also some other reasons that back, especially in 1787, the idea of counting the popular vote would have been very chaotic. They thought that this was a more streamlined system, which today. Obviously, we can talk about whether technology makes the Electoral College unnecessary. It is a current debate that is happening. The way that you determine the number of electors for each state is the number of representatives and the number of senators in Congress. So North Carolina currently has 15 electors. California is the biggest. They have 55. Texas has 38. And both Florida and New York have 29. Those are our 4 biggest states as far as representation. And we can see there are 2 blue states, 2 red states. Most states have a winner-take-all system. So, like, even though the Democratic nominee, Clinton, got all 55 of California's electoral votes, there were plenty of Republicans who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Those are just not represented by the Electoral College. This is why you can have a situation where a president does not win the most votes, but still wins the presidency, like what happened in 2016. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by, I think, around 3 million votes, but because of the electoral system, Donald Trump was the first to receive 270 electoral votes, which is what you need to win. This has happened 3 other times in history, in the year 2000, 1888, and 1876. So, a question for consideration. Should the Electoral College be altered or abolished, or kept the same? Does the system created by our framers of the Constitution in 1787 still work for us today, or does it cause more issues than it solves? And that is the end of this section's notes.